Hello, my name's Hannes, this is Painting by Letters, and today I'm going to tackle a proper white whale. So to explain why this project is important to me, I need to give you a very small amount of context. So I grew up in the county of Northumberland. For those of you outside the UK, it's about as north as you can get and still call it England. It's quite a sparsely populated area. And for me, although I lived on a bus route, I lived in a village and I was about 40 minutes on the bus from the nearest town, and that bus itself only came about once an hour. To get to the nearest city, I would be travelling for about 2 hours. So playing games of Warhammer was something that was quite hard to do as a kid. And my solution to this was I set up school clubs. At both my middle school and my high school, I set up a club, and it mostly just ended up being people playing on tables around books and things like that. Some of those memories I genuinely treasure, seriously treasure. And when I was setting up at high school, the teacher who was helping me through that, who was also the deputy head at the time, basically sent an email to Games Workshop. They had this scheme going where schools, I don't know if they still do it, where schools could sort of say, hey, we've started a club, and Games Workshop would sort of interact with us. And in this case, Games Workshop sent us a box of goodies. Now, in that box of goodies was one of the landing pads. Now, I had been collecting bits of scenery here and there myself. I had a bastion, I had a defense line, for example, but I never had this. And as a kid, it was one of the models that I really, really wanted. The thing is that Skyshield never got built. We didn't have glue at school, we weren't allowed it. We didn't have spray cans, things like that. Although we probably could have asked the art teacher to use it, we didn't, and so it just stayed in a box. And as that club disbanded, as I changed school years, probably still exists somewhere in the town of Alnwick. There'll be a box with a Skyshield Landing Pad in it that was never built. And when I got back into the hobby, this memory sort of stuck out to me a little bit. It was something that I wanted to fix. I always thought that they were really cool and I'd never had one, and I really wanted one. I spent a little bit of time on eBay and things like that looking at the odd one that pops up, but I really wanted the experience of building it from scratch, and the ones on eBay that were disassembled and were still bare plastic were becoming increasingly more expensive, and I sort of figured I'd missed the boat. I wasn't really willing to spend that kind of money on something. Although it was important to me, it wasn't that crucial to my hobby. I've always cared more about the armies than I have the scenery. And then out of nowhere, Games Workshop announces it as one of the sets that you can go onto their website and they'll make it to order. So at about 10 on pre-order day, I put my order in and figured I'm not going to see it for months. I mean, that pre-order day was 2 weeks ago. And it turned up a day later. So I'm guessing they had some of them at the back of the store somewhere or in a warehouse somewhere, pre-prepped for the first couple of people. I've got to say they come in very uninspiring boxes. Case in point, when I first opened it on camera for building it, which I did about a day after I received it, I opened the Bastion instead by accident. So yeah, I have this footage now of me opening the Bastion box, closing it, and not doing anything with it, but it'll resurface at some point, I'm sure. So this is a sprue that I remember. It has these kind of huge plates that obviously loosely lock together. That's actually quite easy to build. Then following that, it's got those little, it's the defense line structures. It's crenellations, isn't it, across the top. But I just had the feeling from day dot that that was going to be a terrible mechanism to swing it up and to swing it down. I've thought about how to position it, how to place it, and I thought I wouldn't glue it because I know that there was some complaints when I glued the boarding actions ones together. And sitting here now, I'm actually quite glad that I did that, because now I've not glued this one. Honestly, the mechanism is just awful. It doesn't feel right when it's primed and when it's painted. So I'd probably recommend just picking either in or out and sticking with it. But anyway, that's me. The building process is relatively simple. The legs are just 2 pieces that you glue together. That's really simple. The only vaguely fiddly bit is, obviously, if you do want to have the mechanism, is gluing the panels down that have the clips on without getting any glue further enough up that it'll like seal the clip. But it's not too bad. Because this project was important to me for sort of nostalgic reasons, and because I finally got to build one, I sort of didn't really want to labour too much over painting it. I think scenery at its best is something that's painted quite quickly, and really the model should pop off it rather than really the scenery should steal the show. So I want something kind of mute. And I was thinking to myself, I also sort of wanted to experiment with painting in a way that I don't usually paint, because if I mess it up, it's probably quite easy to strip something that's completely flat. So, for the first time ever, I decided to pick 3 things that I wouldn't normally do. The first is I primed them with Halford's Grey Spray. If anyone's watched any Midwinter Minis, you'll have heard people talk about this. This kind of plastic primer is a real favourite in the UK because it's pretty cheap, compared to GW at least. You can get cheaper. But there's a Halfords on every street in this country. They mostly do sort of bike and car stuff. But this plastic primer comes very well regarded. I've got to say I don't get it. After using it, it leaves a bit of a texture over what it's been sprayed on, but that might be that it's a bit more of a temperamental primer than GW's primers are. Particularly their Chaos Black, it goes on completely flat, where I found that their Lead Belcher does sometimes leave a little bit of texture. This leaves quite a lot of texture. I do think though for scenery stuff that's probably quite useful because it allows you to slap other stuff on it very, very quickly. Following that, I thought, well, it's grey, let's darken down the recesses. I don't particularly care about staining. What I'm looking for here is just to build up a bit of texture, a bit of variety, so I kind of want a bit of staining. So something that I would never normally do, which is coat something in a shade but not clean it up. For anybody who's watched any of my Necron videos, you'll know that I use Agrax all the time. I coat the entire model in it, but I'll sit there for quite a while and wick away lots of the excess. Here I was not doing it. The point was to bathe the model in it. This left exactly what I was looking for. Lots of streaks, lots of texture, lots of grime. It didn't quite go into the recesses, but I think that's probably because the recesses are sort of so broad at this scale. They don't really feel like recesses anymore, and my suspicion is that whatever medium they're using just hasn't quite sunk into them well enough. The next thing of note is I've been buying a lot of inks. I've talked about this on the channel before. The reason I've been buying inks is because I'm hoping to build an army that I will paint with them. I'm a little while off building that army. I've bought a couple of things for it here and there, but I need to experiment with this. So that was the idea. Let's just grab some inks off the shelf. I got a blue, I got a purple, I got some metallic ones and a red, and I'm just going to pick random panels and paint them in. The whole idea with this is that we're going to knock this back a lot when it's over. So if it looks really vibrant, that's actually a good thing. We want that vibrancy to shine through when it's basically been painted over. I learned a couple of things about inks here. All of these inks are from the same brand and they all have the same rated opacity as well, and yet they all interact radically different. Some of them stained quite a lot, some of them created quite nice flat colours. That red is just absolutely amazing, whereas I think the purples in particular stained a little bit more. Probably if you were painting a model, you'd maybe look to do a second coat. Again, we're not really that bothered about staining here, we're just trying to paint at speed, and it's a lot of model. I also made the executive decision only to paint 1/2 of the landing pad. The reason being, at least in my thoughts at the time, is if it ended up looking disastrous, I'll just glue them open, the sort of the sides open, and then just stick it upside down, because the attachment can work either way around. And so one side I'm just leaving completely blank, and then the other side I'm painting all of these inks on. The vibrancy really read very well, and for that project when it does happen, because it's going to include some quite larger models as well as some really small ones, I'm actually feeling really positive about that project whenever I get the time to start it. I've got some Marines and some Necrons and some Tyranids first, but whenever I start that project, I think inks are going to be the ideal option. They coat beautifully, and I think they don't take that much to learn. They're basically just liquids, but they're liquids that stain much more than contrast. So you kind of get the consistency of a contrast where it just sort of spreads out, but you get the opacity of a more traditional sort of layer paint, I suppose, painted properly. I quite enjoyed using them, at least. Then finally, I wanted to do something else that I've never done before, which is going to sound really basic, because I know that this is one of those strategies that almost everyone's tried, but it's sponging. I've never used a sponge with paints before. I just thought I'd give it a go. Just, again, we're looking for that texture. We've already got 2 different types of painting that create lots of variations. We're just looking to create even more. So I picked out a Vallejo black. It was abysmal, just wasn't working properly, and I think the sponge was bringing in too much air, so it almost sort of became kind of bubbly on top. So instead, I just switched to a Baden black, and it worked beautifully. Just doing a couple of stipples here and there. Again, we're just building a bit more texture. To finish the model, I decided to use Vallejo's dark aluminium. I've been loving this paint. It's designed for airbrushes, but it seems to just work amazingly well. It must just have such a high pigment. It just coats beautifully. And the whole plan here is to basically overbrush it over everything. I got some, like a cheap sort of spread brush, which is designed for canvas work, I think, and basically just went all over the entire model, just giving it that metallic feel. This really knocks back those other colours in a really nice way. It brings everything together, and lots of that texture that we built up before remains through the piece. This video, I suppose, is taking a leaf out of a Tabletop Minions video in which he picked out a piece of terrain that had been in his cupboard for years and painted it in a style, and he talked about that going through the ugly phase, which, my god, this definitely did. But in the same vein, it's just throwing paints and experimenting with stuff on something fun that you're not likely to come across, and something that's going to stick out for you, and something that I think looks quite good on a table. I have really enjoyed this project. It's a bit of fun, picking something up that I was really nostalgic for, that I never got the chance to build properly, and just throwing different styles of painting at it as an experiment. Because if it doesn't match anything else, that doesn't matter, because it wasn't going to anyway. I've only got one of them. I really like the end effect. It's got this weird thing where I think if you view it almost level on, it looks 1,000,000% better than it does straight down. I don't know. It's probably something to do with the reflective capacity of that dark aluminium somehow. But it looks really, really good. And again, it's just a bit of fun. It's picking something out that's nostalgic. It's been a real palette cleanser for me. So yeah, this is me painting my white whale, the thing that has lived in my brain for years that I finally got to do, and I really like it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. It's been a pleasure as always. If there's something that you've been wanting to do for years that's hidden away or that's been sitting on eBay for ages and you know you're going to buy it at some point, I'd really recommend doing this as kind of a liberating thing. It's really, really good fun. But thank you so much for your time. I've been Hannes, this has been Painting by Letters, and keep safe out there.